Hey everybody, Mike Satel here of Satel Tutoring, and this is yet another lesson on Name That Strategy, where I do 10 random math questions and try to give you insight into what I see when I first see them on the test, right? The main strategies for math are really important: guess and check, arithmetize, plug points into equations, but sometimes it can be hard to know when to use those strategies. The purpose of this lesson is that you will see me react instantaneously to a question and see how I kind of decide what my first two steps are going to be. I'm not going to solve the 10 questions. All the links to the video solutions are in the description, so make sure you go to those if you want more details. But we are going to review the main strategies. If you don't know what I'm talking about, then I recommend you start off by going to my website, sateltutoring.com/math, to watch the longer lesson that introduces the strategies and lets you get your first crack at them. But also make sure you check out the library while you're there. Check out my SAT Math Packets Study Guide, which you can purchase as a way to help your score and improve your weaknesses. And my explanations will always focus on these strategies because you need new habits to answer these questions. And before we begin too, please make sure that you subscribe to my channel. It really does help me. And now, without further ado, here are some random math questions. Let's see what we can do with them. All right, let's see what we got in this batch of questions. All right, first things first, I do see an equation, right? So I would be like, okay, can I plug something into this equation? Now, just kind of on the second glance, I do see that they're asking about a specific value in this equation, and so my brain is already going to say, I don't want to think of this in terms of the specifics of this story. I need to turn it into something else. Get back to basics. What do I see here? I don't see h equals 4.36d plus 38.44. No, I see y equals mx plus b, the most important equation for the SAT, the equation of a line. And so in this case, 4.36 is in the spot of the slope, so I'd be thinking as I go through these answer choices, what sounds like a slope? This is not particularly strategic in the sense of, are we guessing and checking? Are we, plugging points into equations? We're not actually doing a lot of math here. It's more of a conceptual, do we understand the math? But even there, our goal should be to turn the complicated, twisted stuff back into something that's more easy to understand and more in line with what we learned in school. So you don't want to see this as a story about aspen trees. You want to see this as a line, and then you can think about it more easily. All right, this one looks crazy, but I do notice anytime I see a crazy story that has a lot of lines, my thought is, can I work backwards? And in this case, guess and check is going to save me. Because rather than look at this story and try to build my own equation, I can look at the differences in the choices and see how those differences are going to be explained in the story. So first and foremost, I see the choice of 0.07 or 7. I'm going to go into the story. I'm going to say, which one does it have to be, 7 or 0.07? I'm also going to ask myself, is it about a negative or a positive? Or I could also, there's a third thing, ask about inequalities. So there's 3 things that I would be searching for in this story. And the good thing is, even if you only understood 2 of them, you're still going to get this right. So you have this ability to kind of pick and choose if you think about guessing and checking and working backwards. Anytime you look at a question like this, your first gut feeling should be, this looks like it's going to be a pain. Let me try to look at the choices and see what the differences are, rather than look at the question and understand exactly what's happening. All right, here we have, this is perfect. I have an equation, obviously. I have a bunch of other equations here. And I do notice that they are changing the variable. Right? Everything kind of looks very similar, except here we have an m, and at the top we have a t. So what is happening here? I would read the question, but already on my mind I'm thinking I should probably arithmetize. They don't give me a point to plug in. They don't give me a specific coordinate to test in these equations. But I'm basically going to make one up. I'm going to think what's happening in this story, usually at the point where t or x or m is equal to 0, and then see what would happen. In this case, that actually wouldn't matter now that I look at it, because all of the exponents would be 0, and that would all cancel out, so that's not going to work. But I'm sure that when t equals 1, I can understand what's going on. And so use the story to pick numbers that make sense, but I'm ultimately really going to want to have some sort of numerical confirmation of whatever my hunch is, right? I might look at the story and have a hunch about how to solve it, but I don't trust it because the SAT is really good at taking my hunches, my instincts, and using them against me. So numbers don't lie. The numbers will help me prove my instinct right or wrong and make me much more confident in my answer. Here's a very similar thing. I do have equations. I have t's. Is there a point I can plug in? Can I plug in for these t's? Well, I have a story here. I could also maybe think about guessing and checking because there are some clear differences in the story, right? Is it going to be an exponential system or this is like more linear? So I can think about those things. But again, every time I have a story, I'm kind of going in and I'm looking, is there any way to come up with either the point to plug in or that they give me a point to use. So it's kind of a version of plug points into equations, but I also have these different equations that I can kind of guess and check against the story. So anytime I've got that story, I'm working backwards. That's really what I'm doing here. Here's another story. A store sells hats and scarves. The store makes a profit of $8. Yeah. So right away, 3, 4. I see that my story has 4 numbers. And before I even try to understand what those numbers mean, I'm going to just think, well, it's a good possibility that I lose track of these numbers or get confused by them. And if I try to make an equation that takes care of all those numbers at once, I might make the wrong equation. And I might not notice that it's wrong until it's too late. So this is a great candidate for guess and check because even though there are 4 numbers in the question, there's really only 1 number in the choices. I know obviously there's 4, but like what I mean is the numbers in the choices only represent one aspect of the story, right? What do they mean? Here, the number of scarves that were sold. So it's either 7, 9, 14, or 18. So I can test those values. I can say, okay, well, what do I know? If there were 7 scarves, what would I know about them? Well, it says a scarf costs $5. So, okay, 7 times 5 is 35. And slowly with guess and check, we build the story rather than trying to do algebraic equations that have to condense all of the story at once. And so that forces us to be completely perfect. Whereas if we guess and check, we can take things one step at a time and it's less to worry about. So when you got a lot of numbers going on in the story, look at the choices, see if you can work backwards from the simpler numbers that they give you. All right, perfect. Without even reading it, I know exactly what my strategy is going to be. I have an equation, and this chart is telling me I have points. So plug points into equations. Our simplest, most mindless strategy. It doesn't matter what they give you. If they give you equations and they give you points, plug the points into the equations. Don't ask too many questions, and I give you permission to be lazy. The first point you should be plugging in is the 0 point. See what happens. If nothing happens good, then it doesn't matter. It took you 2 seconds because 0 is such an easy number. Then 2, and then 3, right? So work from simplest, laziest to most complex. This is definitely a plug points into equation strategy. It may look crazy, but it's definitely gettable with that. Okay, here we have a unit conversion question, and I also noticed that they're underlining something. So the SAT, whenever they do that, you know that at least one of those wrong answers is what you would get if you didn't pay attention to what they underlined. Okay, so you should underline it again with your own pencil to make sure that you do not miss that piece of information. All right. So in this case, there isn't really going to be a strategy. For unit conversion questions, the main strategy is really show your work. You're definitely going to be able to use a calculator. However, you should be cautious as you do that. Any step that you put in the calculator, you should be writing on your page. It's just another way to check your work. Plus, calculators make mistakes if you make a mistake entering the numbers. So having it on the page is a good way to kind of like hopefully catch that mistake. Yeah, show your work. There's not really much else you're going to be able to do here. Okay. There's really no strategy here either, other than, I guess, beware of traps. Without even reading it, I can recognize from experience what we're dealing with. We have a probability question, we have a chart of data, and then we're going to be asked for a specific piece of that chart, I should say, a piece of that chart. Now the trap is that I accidentally misread the question and choose the wrong piece of data. So this is a great example where with practice on the SAT, you start to recognize topics that come up again and again, and they look similar each time. The story will be different, the numbers will be different, but they look very similar, these kind of charts and probability questions. So when you see one, the trap is also very, very similar. They want you to mess up, specifically when we create the fraction, they want you to mess up the denominator. The top part is usually easy. It's the denominator of the fraction that's usually where people make a mistake. So when you do that step, knowing that there's a high chance that there's this trap here, you have to be extra cautious. That's kind of my advice for these, is certain topics are very heavy on traps. As you practice, as you watch my videos, you will sense what those topics are, and when you encounter one, your brain will be like, uh-oh, danger, be careful. That's exactly how I think about it, and that's how I avoid the traps. All right. Perfect. I know I'm going to arithmetize here. Without even reading too much, I can see I've got an equation with 1, 2, 3 letters. Not good. How often do you have that in algebra? I also see in the question that they're being very vague. X is positive, Y is negative. Well, why not just give me a positive value of X? Why not just say X is 2, Y is negative 2, right? I could do that and test out what those values actually do for me instead of thinking about this conceptually. So anytime you get a lot of letters and you don't actually need to solve for any of them, they just kind of float around, put a number in there, arithmetize, see what the number is doing, and that way you don't have to guess what the letters will do. You can just see how this equation plays out because the numbers will work. So follow any instructions that they give you in the question. Make sure you don't pick like 0 for X, as they're telling us it's positive, but for Y is equal to negative 2, I would just put those in, see what you get for K, and that's probably going to tell you your answer. All right. I also see a complex algebra question here, and so I could definitely arithmetize here as well. Because notice I have an equation with B, C, N, P. None of those letters matter. They carry through into the answer choices as well, so I could definitely make up some numbers for those. I would personally have a little hesitance to arithmetize here because it's so clear to me what the instructions are. They want me to rearrange this equation so that N is by itself, and the arithmetize could take some time, especially without a calculator. We might pick numbers that get kind of messy. So in this case, I personally would probably just do the algebra and make sure I'm following the right steps, but move all the variables away from the N. However, this is where the personally part comes. If you personally hate that and always make mistakes when you do algebra, then you got to arithmetize. You cannot get this wrong. You have to be able to solve a question like this. This is not a particularly difficult question. If it is difficult for you to do that algebra, you need this other method, this strategic method, to get these points anyway. I'd rather you take a little bit more time to get this because there's only going to be harder stuff later, so it's not going to get more likely that you earn another 10 points to make up for this. This is a good shot at 10 points here. So pick a number, pick a value for N, for, ooh, that's an ugly N, a value for P, and a value for C, and then use them to solve for B. So you'll have 4 numbers at the end, but you'll pick 3 of them to start, and you'll find the 4th one, and then you can use all 4 of those numbers in the answer choices. It's annoying, but I do think it's worthwhile in order to get this question. And those are the kinds of decisions, just to kind of end on a theme here, this is the kind of decisions you'll need to make. For me, my default position is always to use a strategic approach. Avoid algebra whenever possible. I am good at algebra. I know how to solve all of these questions algebraically. But it's 58 math questions in an SAT. It's 4 hours of testing. You're going to be tired. And everybody makes mistakes in algebra even when they're not tired. Occasionally, you lose a negative. Occasionally, you distribute incorrectly. So anything we can do to lower the chance of a careless mistake is going to increase our score. And for me, avoiding algebra is the #1 way to avoid those mistakes and to get more questions right. So I do it as my default move all the time. And occasionally I just decide maybe algebra is better. But my default move, if it's equal, I'm going with the strategy because they save points. Well, I hope this was helpful and it gave you some insight on how I think about the test and when you can use the strategies. The best way to get better at using the SAT math strategies is to take SAT math practice sections and do more practice questions. And the best way to do that is to subscribe to the Satel Tutoring channel and visit my website. I post questions of the day, I make longer lessons, and I have video explanations of every question from the official SAT practice test. So you will always know when a strategy is the right move because I will explain it and do it. So please subscribe. And if you have any comments or questions, make sure you leave them. If you like the video, like the video. If I get enough likes, I will make more. If I know that these are helping, I know to make more stuff like this. So please, your feedback is really helpful. Thanks for watching.